Just to recap again, like we've recapped in the other 3 sessions, we've now actually covered the approaches in individual and team organisations, and we've also covered the principles and tools and assumptions that the solutions-focused methodology uses. However, one thing we haven't discussed on is the solutions-focused approach. We did mention it actually came out of solutions-focused brief therapy, which most coaching in all of the models come out of therapy anyway, but it's specific come out of solutions-focused brief therapy, and it is to that which we actually turn to today. There are questions in my mind because I've actually done team and organisations and individual coaching, but I've never touched the therapeutic side, and it is actually quite interesting if it's actually come out from that. And as you've actually dealt with the therapy side for quite some time, then perhaps you should be the one that not does most of the talking, but we highlight things and our questions come from it. But the questions that are raised in my mind, and I think you can actually go to this, is that therapy, you've got 3 different types of relationship in therapy for an individual client. Is either a visitor, a customer, or a complainant. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is the areas we've covered the areas used, and is brief therapy only for the easy stuff?
I think you're right. Different people turn up for therapy at different stages. I've used the approach. A lot of my clinical work has been in the field of addiction, and the rest in mental health and physical health. In addiction, very often I would be working with someone who didn't necessarily want to be there. So there might be what we refer to as a mandated client, someone who has been sent for therapy. So that could be as part of the legal process. They're on probation, and the probation service have decided that as part of their order and as part of the rehabilitation package, they need to have therapy. Equally, somebody could be mandated by a member of the family, and that's usually, I'm only here because my girlfriend said if I don't pack in with the booze, she's going to leave me. So that's another form of being mandated. And a lot of therapists, quite a few therapists, don't like working with mandated clients. They like working with voluntary clients, if you like. The approach with solution-focused brief therapy is to start from a very, very simple premise, is thanks for turning up today. Because if someone is mandated to turn up and they don't, well, what's going to happen? They're going to lose the girlfriend maybe. They may breach a probation order, but it's not a capital offence. They're not going to be executed for not turning up for therapy. So there's still an element of choice. And I think the thing that I find remarkable is people who are mandated for therapy still turn up. And I'll always make a point of saying, thanks very much for turning up. Thanks for getting up early this morning and turning up here at the clinic at 9 o'clock or whatever time it is. So I think it's, again, identifying the strengths, the individual strength of that person to turn up for therapy. And let's face it, therapy isn't necessarily an appealing thing because, as we've said, a few times, change isn't easy. So the first premise is you turned up, away you go. When someone's been mandated, one of the early questions will be, what would your girlfriend have to see in order for her not to send you to see someone like me? So it sounds a bit convoluted, but asking someone what the person who is mandating that change would want to see. And that's a way of identifying goals. What I then do is to say to the individual, okay, so that's what your probation officer wants, that's what your boyfriend or girlfriend wants. What would you want? What would be your best hopes? And get on to what the advantages would be of that change. And quite often it can be either very similar benefits, or it can be benefits that are just as good. So a chap I saw a while ago, if I can get off the drink, if I can stop drinking, then I keep my girlfriend. If I keep my girlfriend, I get access to my daughter. So there was another benefit there. The other thing is, and this chap, without any more prompting, starts to give me a whole list of advantages of cutting down on his alcohol use. And yet he was a mandated client. So the two don't really seem to match up, but given the opportunity, and when we have a conversation based on respect and the expertise of the client, if you like, there's a whole set of changes that can take place. And that chap did well. He reduced and stopped his alcohol use. His girlfriend stayed with him. He got access to his daughter. They've subsequently had other children. He's back in work. He's playing football, which was his great passion, saving money, going on holiday. It's a whole life turnaround for somebody who didn't want to turn up in the first place.
I actually think you've hit on a very, very, very good point there. We say in any solution-focused approach that we're not problem-phobic, and we're not. We recognise that the problem's there. We don't analyse them. But you've actually hit on a very, very good point. We did talk that the whole approach is actually person-centred rather than problem-solving.
Yeah.
Than problem-centred. Is that right?
I think you're absolutely right. It's regardless of what someone's history is and regardless of what problems they've got at that point, it's about working with the person, not the problem, and it's about working with the present and the future whilst being respectful of anything that has happened in the past. And I think one of the most crucial differences with solution-focused brief therapy is that we don't go for the archaeology. We don't aim to resolve the problems in the past. The idea of trying to resolve historical issues is very noble. It would be great if we could, but it's very, very difficult, for example, to take someone who's in their 30s back to the childhood and fix those problems at source. All we can do is work with the person in the present and work with their preferred future. And Yvonne Dolan had a lovely model, which is that we can talk about someone or talk with someone in terms of them being a victim of trauma. We can talk in terms of that person being a survivor of a trauma. But Yvonne Dolan suggested this idea that maybe what we should be doing is helping people to get to a point where they are the best they can be in today's environment. And that's a very, very healthy and useful approach, which I've used with quite a large number of people who've previously been traumatised.
It's like, I actually think that I heard a phrase a long time ago that in solutions focus we're challenging with curiosity about a client. We're not challenging the client physically, we're actually challenging their thinking and trying to actually highlight the positives of what they've actually done, being curious about somebody and through trying to help them out. And it's in some ways it's positive curiosity, and I actually think that with all that's been said about coaching, and that's what coaching does, solutions focused approach from when I actually read about it 6-7 years ago, although I didn't take it up, has actually appealed to me, because we don't need to challenge people. If we challenge people, how do we challenge them? Do we challenge them through actually taking them back and solving problems, or do we challenge them through helping them to think through from where they are now to actually where they want to be?
I think you're right, and one of the similarities, I guess, with coaching and brief therapy, solution-focused brief therapy, is that idea of working with the person, not the problem, working with the present and the future, and that, as you say, that curiosity. What I've found is that if we're respectfully curious about that person, then they will be the person who they'll come up with their own compliments. I think there's a huge risk in me pointing out to someone what they're good at because of the power relationship in therapy. Whether I like it or not, I'm in quite a powerful position in therapy. So if I give compliments, they can be seen as being condescending, or it could develop a relationship where that person depends on me to give them compliments. Much more healthy, I think, to get that person to ask those respectfully curious questions. So what kind of things do you do well, and who notices when you do those things well? And that person makes self-affirming comments like, well, I cook the tea every night. Very, very basic things that we might take for granted, but which are fantastic affirmative statements. That person having said it, they own that, and they can take that forward. Whereas if I say, well, you cook the tea every night, that changes the same compliment by a huge margin.
I actually think you're right in that respect, in terms of when you say you pay a compliment, you're paying a compliment, you own the compliment. And what you saying it is you're actually judging them, and I think in any sort of therapeutic or coaching session then you've got to be non-judgmental. And I picked up a phrase out of Insoo Kim Berg's book, and it's about how did you decide what's good enough? It was a very, very pertinent question as to what we're talking about now. So yes, we're challenging through respectful curiosity, we're challenging the thinking and not the person. And also I actually think respect, and if we can get them to actually gain that respect back, because a lot of people come to therapy who are feeling with low esteem, how we can actually get them to actually respect themselves. Because I've always believed all my life that respect really comes from within yourself. If you respect yourself, then you can respect other people.
Absolutely, I think you're right.
Now, the question I did ask, and I did mention it right earlier, final question that we're actually going to talk about is, they say, and I've heard a lot about this and I've never found a real answer for it yet, is people often said, well, solutions focused brief therapy, is it only for the easy stuff?
And I think that's an understandable response, because we're used to therapies which take years to take effect. I spoke recently with someone who said that they'd been in therapy for 4 years. I expressed some surprise at that, and she said, well, it takes 2 years to develop a therapeutic relationship. I'm more used to seeing people for anywhere between 3, 4, 5 sessions. The average, there's a lot of evidence for solution focused brief therapy, and part of that evidence base is that 3 to 4 sessions generally is enough. Equally, I've seen people once a month for a couple of years. That's been because, in the same way that you're saying that goals are dynamic, equally people's life situations and difficulties can be dynamic. So we've had brief therapy for a long time, is a phrase that's sometimes used. So it's not just for the easy stuff, and it isn't necessarily brief. Steve DeShazer once said that solution focused brief therapy was the worst name that could possibly be given to it, because it wasn't developing solutions and it wasn't necessarily brief. So I think that rings true sometimes. It certainly isn't just for the easy stuff. I've worked with people with a diagnosis of PTSD. I've worked with a number of people who've been traumatised either during the childhood or with dramatic events as an adult. Worked with people who have significant drug and alcohol problems, significant mental health problems, and maybe even more importantly, work with whole families. So the phrase dysfunctional family is bandied about, and certainly it's difficult sometimes for an individual to change if their family situation or their social situation is producing the problem in the first place. I work with some very interesting families where mum and dad have got mental health problems, the client that I'm seeing has got mental health problems, and maybe the siblings have too, and that can make for some interesting conversation. The good news is, in a family of 4 or 5 people, there are 4 or 5 experts, and we've got a whole team to work on the problem. If I'm seeing an individual, we've only got one expert, so family therapy can work incredibly well.
I actually think, to be quite honest, you've just used it there. You've just shown an analogy between the family, or a similarity between a family and an organisation. You've got, as you quite rightly say, 4 or 5 experts. Therefore, you may have 4 or 5 times the chance of getting to a solution, or the client getting to a solution which he wants, getting to a future which he wants.
One of the things I did want to say is, if people have been interested in solution-focused practice, solution-focused brief therapy, there are some fantastic resources out there. I'm National Development Officer for the United Kingdom Association for Solution Focused Practice. They produce lots of free to access resources, so if people go onto a search engine and look for UKASFP, you'll find the website, and equally if they look for Solution News, it's a free to access journal with loads and loads of information, and so that's a quick plug for the association.
Yeah. Well, have you been a member of the UK ASFP for a long time then?
I'm proud to say I was one of the founding members, previously being chair and now National Development.
How has it
Officer.
changed over the years?
It used to be a group of people who practice solution focused brief therapy or solution focused practice. It's reflecting the model itself. It's becoming much more open. We have a conference every year. We've got all the resources that we've developed, but most of all it's just so accessible to members of the public and to practitioners in any field, really.
So, out of all the 4 sessions that we've had, what would be your final word on the sessions, and particularly on the solutions focused approach?
I think they've been incredibly interesting conversations with yourself. It's been an opportunity to think about solution focused practice, and hopefully it'll give people a few ideas about how it might be useful for them.
My final word is your thoughts as well. I've coaching and training a long time, but particularly in solutions focused last 3 years. I've actually noticed in some ways the difference in myself. I've noticed the difference in family members, and I've realised how it works, and the teaming up has been a very, very pleasant experience for me, and it's been one that's opened my eyes to other things within the solutions focused approach as well.